Snacking is always more fun if you go with the flow. Same with cooking. In the kitchen, I let my ingredients show me the way on a voyage of discovery. Let me share a secret recipe. Discover an ingredient that fires your imagination. Choose other flavors to match. Find the best way to cook them.
Simple is best.
My secret recipe? Cooking without a recipe.
You can do it too. You can do it too.
My home Prince Edward Island is a small place on the eastern seaboard, and here we're big on traditional flavors, like fish stew. Of course, any region by the sea has its own version of fish stew. Tonight for Rachel, Gabe, and I for supper, I think I'll take our local fish stew and play with it a bit, jazz it up, even add some global flavors. I love to cook without a recipe, to experiment, and you can too, as long as you start with great, fresh ingredients. Now, fish stew is made up of three basic parts. You've got your fresh fish, fish stock, and the flavor base. The flavor base always comes first, and the fresh fish goes in at the end. We'll save this for later. The flavor base is your opportunity to take the fish stew anywhere in the world you want to. In fact, just about any one of these ingredients will work in a fish stew. For instance, dried oregano, Portuguese fish stew. What else do we have? In the Maritimes, our fish stews tend to be dairy-based, and we often use things like evaporated milk. But in Thailand, you'd use coconut milk. It's not dairy, but it sure is Thai. Now, in the Mediterranean, they don't use dairy at all. They tend to be tomato-based. In fact, I think I will use tomatoes today. Now, what do I have to go with tomato? Here's another sunny flavor. Fennel. Beautiful. Nice, bright licorice flavor. Very Mediterranean. Works perfectly with tomatoes. The sweetness of the fennel, the acid balance of the tomatoes. This will work nicely. Very authentic. And the flavor base has started. I think I'll add some onions to it as well. Onions go with just about anything. They're pretty pungent when they're raw, but as soon as you start heating them, they lose that pungency and they add a nice sweetness to things. I don't want to color these, I just want to sweat them. That means just stirring them, gently heating them through, the moisture starts to come out, the flavors brighten, livens up, they start tasting like licorice. Another good flavor-based ingredient, garlic. Very pungent. Definitely needs to be sauteed a little bit, sweated. Take some of that acrid pungency out of it. Sliced garlic. I'm doing this over a medium heat because I don't want to brown the vegetables. I just want to soften them. Step one, the flavor base, has begun. Here's one of my favorite snacks, edamame beans. Really simple to work with. All you have to do is steam them. Pick a way to steam them, whatever you like to do if you're steaming something. I tend to use a pot with about an inch or so of water in it, and one of these flowering steamer baskets. These are kind of cool. But if you don't have one of these, you can use one of those bamboo affairs. You can use one of the steamers that fits on top of another pot. Heck, you can even put them in the microwave, whatever. Just take a handful and heat them up. And as soon as it's steaming, it's ready to go. So I've got a moment. Let's see how this is doing. The vegetables are nice and soft in the flavor base. It's time for a little bit of wine. Let's see what we have. Riesling, one of my favorite cooking wines. Lots of aromatic flavors in it, a nice crisp acidity. It's going to come forward and balance these flavors out very nicely. The vegetables are fairly sweet, so the acid of the wine is key at this point. half a bottle or so. And this is good, tasty wine for drinking too. I never use a cooking wine that I wouldn't also drink. So this is going to have to reduce, and once it's reduced, it'll be ready for the tomatoes, ready to move on. Perfect. When the edamame beans turn bright green, they're done. All you have to do is heat them through. It takes about 2 minutes of steaming. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of salt on them, and now they're ready. Now you don't actually eat the pod. It's the bean inside the pod that's the edible part. Boy, they're beautiful. They've got a nice, sweet, nutty flavor to them. They're very high in protein. These are actually extremely healthy for you. Okay, that flavor base is reducing nicely. I'm going to be adding the tomatoes any minute now. And I still have to come up with some more Mediterranean flavors, some herbs and spices. For dinner tonight, for Rachel, Gabe, and I, I'm creating a traditional fish stew with some international flavors. I have fresh local fish, which I'll add to the stew last. I chose tomatoes over dairy and began building a Mediterranean flavor base with the sweet licorice flavor of fennel. I added the base aromatics, onion and garlic, and accented them with the crisp acidity of Riesling, a white wine. I like to chart new ideas in my kitchen journal, my culinary scrapbook. I just might build on them in the future. And that white wine has reduced nicely. This is ready for the tomatoes. Now I often use canned tomatoes because there's more flavor in these than those hard store tomatoes. These tomatoes were ripe in the field. Now this flavor base is almost done. All the base flavors are in it, but there's still room for some accent flavors. Let's see what I can find here. Okay, bay leaf, of course. Bay leaf adds that subtle savory note to it. It makes it taste like dinner, not like dessert. And fennel seed. Fennel goes with fennel, and this is the seed from the fennel plant. The nice thing about these seeds are you can eat them just the way they are. They're soft and chewy. You don't have to grind them up. And you know what? Some spice, some chili flakes. This is a pretty rich stew. It can handle just the slightest little bit of spice to it. A little bit of spicy heat will be good. And, saffron. Check it out. World's most expensive spice. It's purely optional, but if I add this to the fish stew, it instantly becomes the classic French bouillabaisse. Yeah, why not? Saffron. Here we go. Okay. When you're making a fish stew, it's important to remember that the ingredients flavor the fish stew, not the cooking process. Unlike when you're making a meat stew where you might caramelize and roast and build all those cooking flavors in, we're not doing this here. So it's important to season heavily. Don't be tentative. 3 or 4 bay leaves, big splash of fennel seed. Most times when we season food, if anything, we don't add enough. You should always taste the flavoring. It shouldn't be all hidden away so you don't even know it's there. You want to taste it. That's the whole point. A little bit of chili flakes. And I'll save the saffron for later. So we'll just let that simmer for a few minutes. And now it's time to add the fish stock. Now I always save my fish bones, my fish scraps, any fish trimmings, and make a fish stock now and then. It's just as simple as making a chicken stock. Begin with fresh fish bones and fish trimmings for body. Add the aromatic trio, onions, celery, and bay leaves. Then white wine for more body and acidity. Add spicy peppercorns and simply cover with cool water. Gently simmer for 1 hour and occasionally skim off any impurities. Strain for further purity. homemade fish stock. But if you don't have time to make your own, it's perfectly okay to use another neutral stock. Vegetable stock, chicken stock, they work just fine in here. I don't want this stock to reduce. I just want it to sit here and suck up all those flavors. Fish stock doesn't reduce very well. The flavors get really muddy, so best to just leave it at a bare simmer. And that broth is going to taste so good that I'm definitely going to need something to dip into it. I'm going to make some crisp with French bread, and I think I'll flavor them with anchovy paste. A little bit of lemon, put some parsley in it. I'll make an anchovy butter. Nothing to it. I love anchovy paste. This stuff has so much flavor to it. And you can find this in just about any supermarket. Just a little bit of that. It's pretty strongly flavored. Doesn't take very much. Mix that with some butter. Let's see, a little bit of lemon zest. A few drops of lemon juice. Not very much. Just enough to brighten it up, really. A little bit of acid in there will really help neutralize the richness of the anchovy. And a little bit of parsley. Anchovy can stand up to things like rosemary, tarragon, dill, whatever you have, really. Feel free to use whatever bread you happen to have on hand. It doesn't have to be French bread. And I'm cutting it on a bias, which means on an angle, mainly so I get lots and lots of surface area to toast up and get crisp, and it's easier to dip into that broth. There we go. And I'll bake these off at the last second. They'll crisp up in no time. Hey, this fish stew is doing nicely. Step 1, the flavor base is done. Step 2, the fish stock is in. It's almost time for Step 3, the fresh fish and the saffron. For dinner tonight, Rachel, Gabe, and I are having a traditional fish stew with a bit of international flair. I have fresh whitefish waiting to be added at the last second. The flavor base highlights the licorice flavors of fennel, and instead of dairy, a local tradition, I chose canned tomatoes, sun-ripened and flavorful. A crisp Riesling added a sharp acidic balance. Bay leaf adds savory flavor, fennel seed for bright fennel flavor, and chili flakes for a touch of spicy heat. The key to this recipe and all cooking is to follow your ingredients. Let them guide you. You don't need a recipe. As you can see here, I feel like I'm in the Mediterranean. It sure smells like it. This is awesome. And it's time to add the saffron. Now, saffron is the world's most expensive spice, but a little bit goes a long way. It's got an incredible perfume to it, and it adds a real punch of color and flavor, and I like to add it towards the end of a recipe. I find that when you put it in early, it tends to get a little muddled. You want to add it at the end. Keep its flavors distinct. It's actually the stamen of a crocus plant that grows in Portugal, Spain, even parts of France. Look at that. The saffron is optional. You don't have to add it to make a good fish stew. But as soon as I do, it becomes a traditional bouillabaisse, classic French fish stew. And another perfume aroma that the French add to bouillabaisse is orange. The best time to do this is towards the end. That way you preserve all the distinct, fresh, aromatic qualities of the orange. And boy, I can sure smell it now. There we go. Now here's an idea for another orange garnish. A little bit of orange marmalade, some Dijon, some olive oil, some garlic. I'm going to make a condiment, an intensely flavored, strong garlic condiment. It's very traditional with bouillabaisse. Big heaping spoonful of marmalade. little bit of Dijon mustard. The Dijon will help the olive oil emulsify. This is a good place to use fruity extra virgin olive oil. You'll really taste the full flavors of it. And a little bit of raw garlic, 2 cloves or so. Bang. Ooh, that's the idea. It's a condiment. It's very strongly flavored. Boy, that garlic comes through. Probably not the best thing to make on a first date. Time to add the fish. I've got 2 different types of whitefish here. Firm, meaty halibut and delicate, flaky haddock. What I'm going to do is just chunk it up a bit. It's a fish stew. And boy, halibut's nice. Halibut has such a nice sweet flavor to it. And the haddock, you can find haddock anywhere. So how do you know which whitefish to choose then? You can use any whitefish at all, any at all. So what if somebody in your family doesn't like fish? Then what do you do? Well, think of it this way. Most people stay away from a particular food not because of its flavor, but because of its texture. And that's where whitefish comes in. Because the term whitefish refers to a lot of different kinds of fish, not just one. And each of those fish has a unique texture. On one end of the spectrum are light, delicate, flaky fish. Fish like sole, catfish, haddock, and hake. On the other end of the spectrum are firm, meaty fish. Fish like cod or halibut. So here's what I suggest. Experiment a bit. Try a lot of different types of whitefish until you find one with a texture that your family enjoys. And when you do, you know it'll taste great in a fish stew. Beautiful. Fish stew. 3 simple steps. A flavor base, fish broth, and fresh fish. This is ready to serve. Now that's what I call a pot of fish stew. Let's see how it tastes. Ooh, nice broth. A little bit of spice there. Orange flavor is strong. Definitely got the saffron. A little bit of fennel. Tomatoes there, the base. It does need a little bit of salt though. Just a little bit. It's always good to check your seasoning just before you serve it. Stir that in. And it's time to bowl it up. See, by adding that fish at the end, it keeps its shape. It doesn't overcook. It doesn't flake away into nothing. It's just respectful to the ingredients. You're showing them off in their pure form. Oh yeah. Can't wait to eat this. I bet Rachel and Gabe are going to love this. A little bit smaller one for Gabe there. And some garnishes. Got the orange garlic swirl. A little bit of that right there. It's pretty strongly flavored. A little bit will go a long way. And I don't think I'm going to put any of that on Gabe's. And this is the fennel, the tops of the fennel that I cut off earlier. Lots of flavor in there, and it looks pretty too. I always save the tops of my fennel. Gabe can have some of this. He likes green things. And the anchovy toast. I'm just going to slide those in like that. Here we go. I got a couple of plain ones for Gabe. I don't think he likes anchovy too much. That'll be his. And any restaurant, this would be a $29 bowl of the chef's special bouillabaisse. But we know better. It's just an honest bowl of fish stew. And all over the world, it's based on fresh ingredients. You can make this in your own kitchen. And when you do, give me a call. Send me an invitation. Awesome. Oh, is it good? Dip it in there. Dip it in.
Gabriel count. 1, 2, 3.
Cheers.
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 Okay, this is my new favorite thing. It's really good. It's nice to have a fish stew without any cream. Do you have any cream in there? No.
Is it good?
Yeah.
So I knew we had whitefish in there, halibut, and had it. So I went looking for something to flavor it with. I found tomatoes, and next thing you knew, I was making a bouillabaisse. We had some saffron. There was fennel in the fridge.
That fennel is really nice. You can taste.
There goes cheese.
Here you go. I think it turned out great.